What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, we got a real poverty UFC card back in the Apex. You know how these Apex cards go. We got Steve Garcia and David Onama in the main event at featherweight. So, like I said, poverty card. There are some cool fighters on this card, some prospects that I am pretty high on, like Isaac Delgarian, for example. But without further ado, let's jump right into the picks and predictions for UFC Vegas 110. All right, guys, kicking off this card, we have Talita Alencar versus Ariane Carnelossi. And, I think we're kind of getting a discount on someone like Alencar here just because you see the frame, you see how Ariane just looks roided out, huge muscles, and you think, in a women's fight, that strength is going to make a real difference. And that's why I think there might be a little bit of a discount on Talita here. Now, obviously, this is low-level women's MMA, so anything can happen. But Alencar, she is going to look for takedowns the entire fight. She will be that wrestler type of fighter that you don't really want to bet against, that will press Ariane up against the fence. And if she gets her down, I think her top control is really good. I see over 3 rounds, Alencar just kind of going for broke with the takedowns, and I think she does get them, though. So I feel like Talita here by decision could be a solid play. I wouldn't obviously just pay the money line price just because, like I said, this is low-level women's MMA. But I think that, because of Ariane's frame, they're giving her a little bit more respect than they should. I think that Talita Alencar can get Ariane down. I think she does. I think she just grinds out a decision here. It's that draw to Stephanie Luciano that, really kind of proved that Alencar can kind of hang. Obviously, she fought in a rematch and Luciano just pieced her up. But I think Luciano is getting better at a really high clip. I'm really high on Stephanie Luciano. So I think that, Talita Alencar, she can hang. I think Carnelossi is someone that, she can kind of go for broke with those takedowns and win via the scorecard. So give me Talita Alencar. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup on the card, we got Phil Rowe versus Seok Ko, and I'm going to go with Ko to win this one. I think that Rowe was someone that I kind of looked at early on as a potential underdog to pick. He is a strong striker. I think that on the feet, Phil Rowe will eventually kind of beat Seok Ko in a fight, but it's just that this is mixed martial arts, and Phil Rowe doesn't have that urgency when he gets taken down. Ange Lusa was controlling him a lot before, a late rally from Rowe kind of got Lusa out of there in the 3rd round. Seok Ko just coming off that domination of Oban Elliott, and I just think that he can come in here and do the same to Phil Rowe. So I think that Ko gets the takedowns. I don't see that urgency from Phil Rowe to get back up. I still think he looks a little bit lost on his back. So I'm going to go with Seok Ko. Phil Rowe was someone that I was looking at, like I said earlier, as an underdog, but I think Ko gets it done. Overall, though, I'm probably going to stay away from this one, but if Ko gets the takedowns, which I do see him doing, he can kind of control Phil Rowe to a decision here. So give me Ko. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, next matchup, we have Monsterrat, Conejo, Ruiz versus Ardelean, and this is what I mean when I say poverty card. Let's be real, nobody actually gives a shit about a fight like this. I'm going to go with Ardelean. I think that, she's more active. Simply the only reason why I'm going to be picking her here. There's no real finishing potential in this fight, in my opinion. I'm going to go with Ardelean to be more active, just do more over 3 rounds to kind of swing the decision her way. Volume is really the only thing I want to go off in a matchup like this. Like I said, super low-level women's MMA here. Give me Ardelean. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we got Ketlen Vieira versus Norma Dumont. Once again, another poverty matchup for the ultra poverty Apex card. And I'm going to go with the underdog here in Ketlen Vieira. I think that Norma Dumont is the cleaner striker. She throws, much better combinations than a Ketlen Vieira. I just think that once again, this is one of those fights with a very, very similar approach of, I think Vieira gets her down. I think once Vieira gets her down, I don't see Dumont consistently getting back up. I think Vieira steals rounds with control here, and that's just why I'm going to lean the underdog. I think the underdog with the wrestling upside makes a lot of sense. This fight definitely goes all the way. I think there's almost no finishing potential in this matchup. So goes the distance. Ketlen Vieira by decision is what I got. Once again, pretty low-level women's MMA. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card is Donte Johnson versus Sedriques Dumas, and I'm going to go with Johnson here very simply. Dumas is a fighter that you probably don't want to put your money on, not a fighter you really want to back. He has a bunch of problems that are happening outside of the octagon. I'm not sure how that kind of fares into, his preparation and his training for his fights. I'm sure it's a negative impact on him coming into this matchup. Donte Johnson, on the other hand, undefeated, real power, has some real finishing potential. With Sedriques Dumas getting knocked out in his last 2 losses, coming off of that groin shot, no contest to Zachary Ruiz. I just think that with everything going on with SD Dumas, this is just a nice spot to just take Donte Johnson, first round knockout. It's probably what I see happening in this fight. I think Dumas at this point coming in for a paycheck. They're probably trying to get rid of Dumas' contract from the UFC side as well. So just give me Donte Johnson here. I think Dumas is basically done in the promotion. I think he's coming in here, going to get knocked down in the first round. I think that's the end of his contract as well. So Donte Johnson, first round knockout. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup on the card is Timmy Cuamba versus Chang Lee. And, I like Chang Lee in this matchup against Cuamba. I think that this fight being in the Apex, being in Vegas, the smaller octagon, smaller cage, it really kind of favors the guy who brings the fight to his opponent, the one moving forward. And I think that's the problem I have with Cuamba. I don't love his volume, and I think that, he loves fighting off the back foot. But I think Chang Lee, like I said, is going to be the one bringing the fight. I think he has the wrestling upside, the grappling upside here as well. And on top of that, just going to be the busier fighter, the one moving forward, the one pushing Cuamba up against the fence, the one throwing a little bit more volume, shooting takedowns, maybe getting a couple takedowns here and there as well. So, I don't see Chang Lee holding Timmy Cuamba down the entire time. But like I said, I see him being the one imposing a game plan, bringing the fight to his opponent. And I think that's going to help in what I see being a decision fight. So I see this fight going all the way. Cuamba doesn't have some crazy power. He is probably the cleaner, more technical, sharper striker, but his striking defense can, use a little bit of work. And like I said, Ho Lee is going to be the one bringing the volume, bringing the pressure. So give me Chang Lee to win a close decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, now moving up the card, we got Kevin Christian, who's making his UFC debut versus Billy Elekana. And I'm laughing at this matchup just because Kevin Christian is absolutely ass. He's 6'7", coming in with a pretty big size advantage, but will do nothing with it. There's no redeeming qualities to watching this guy fight. And Billy Elekana, he's coming off that win to Ibo Aslan, which in theory is not a terrible win, but at the same time, Ibo Aslan, that fight was lame as hell, and Ibo Aslan has looked not as good as advertised, at least in his last two fights, of course. But he has that loss to Bogdan Guskov, which is, solid competition, solid experience, and, it's not like Guskov just ran through him. Billy Elekana did have some success in that matchup, so I'm going to go with Billy Elekana here. Kevin Christian, like I said, no redeeming qualities to watching this guy. He doesn't even look like he wants to fight. So I'm going to go with Billy Elekana to kind of knock him out. If he doesn't, I'll be pretty surprised. So give me Elekana to win. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup, we got Allan Nascimento versus Cody Durden. And I'm going to go with Allan Nascimento here. I think that, he's got some solid training partners coming out that shoot box, Diego Lima camp, where, they're just ultra dangerous, solid Muay Thai, and, even better jiu-jitsu. Cody Durden, I think, is a solid wrestler, and maybe probably the better striker in this matchup. But I just think that Nascimento is going to kind of impose a game plan and get a submission against Cody Durden here. I see this fight hitting the ground. Nascimento doesn't have the best takedowns, but I think he can get some Charles Oliveira, trip, chain wrestling type takedowns. And, once he gets this fight to the ground, I see him finding a submission on Cody Durden. So I think that Nascimento needs one takedown to end this fight. Over 3 rounds, I definitely see him getting that one takedown. I think on the feet, Durden might be a little bit better, but like I said, I think Nascimento is going to come in here with the exact game plan to get that one takedown. I think he will find it, and when he does, I do see him finding a submission. So Allan Nascimento, give me Oliveira's training partner. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card is Charles Radke versus Daniel Frunza, and I'm going to go with Daniel Frunza here. I think that this fight ends in the first round. Both of these guys, I think, are going to kind of go for broke, and someone's getting knocked out here early. I think that, Daniel Frunza, he's coming off that loss to Reese McKee, and, interesting loss. I don't think Reese McKee is actually that bad. It was a doctor stoppage loss at the end of round 1, but it's one of those fights that's similar to a Renato Moicano and BSD type of fight, where Moicano just does an insane amount of damage to BSD, but then BSD literally, while having all that damage done to him, beats him in round 2. Similarly to this, Reese McKee kind of went for broke, did an insane amount of damage in the start of round 1, but literally started to lose at the end of the round once, Frunza kind of got his feet back underneath him. But then obviously on the stool, the doctor stopped that fight. But like I said, I literally see, if that fight continued, who even knows if Reese McKee would have won that fight. Similarly to the BSD Moicano, if they let BSD continue, I mean, he literally beat Moicano in the second round while looking having one eye, just being in an insane situation. Now, Charles Radke, he's coming off that loss to Mike Mallet. I just think that Radke gets knocked out here. I'm just going to go based off durability. I think one of these guys will knock the other one out in the first round. Daniel Frunza being able to recover from all that damage from Reese McKee while it was, a TKO loss, doctor stoppage. I think that his durability is better than Radke. So give me Frunza, the better durability, the underdog odds in a fight that I think just ends in an early knockout. So Frunze is going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card is Isaac Dulgarian versus Yadir Delval, and I'm gonna go with Dulgarian here. I think that he's 7-1, should be 8-0. That loss to Christian Rodriguez, I think, is one of the absolute craziest split decisions I've ever seen in my life. I think Dulgarian definitely won that fight, and now he's going into this matchup against Delval, and I just think Dulgarian, bro, he's looked just dominant in what he wants to do. He'll get you to the ground. He'll have real good ground and pound once he gets you there. So Delval is tough, but I just don't see him being able to stop the attack that is Isaac Dulgarian. So I think Dulgarian goes in there and just kind of gets him out of there with his ground and pound. I think, Delval will be tough. Maybe Dulgarian has to hunt for a submission, but overall, like I said, I think Dulgarian, real finisher, gets you to the ground at a really high clip. I see him doing that to Delval. I don't see anyone stopping Dulgarian, at this level right now. Let's move on to the next matchup. The next matchup is Jeremiah Wells versus Temba Garimbo, and I'm going to go with Temba Garimbo by decision here. I think he just kind of rides out a pretty boring, control-heavy decision against Jeremiah Wells. I think that, Garimbo coming off that loss to Luque where he got, subbed, but really he just kind of got dropped, and then it was just kind of free game to sub him at that point. I think Garimbo's going to come back, bounce back stronger here. He's got that win over Ramiz Brahimaj, which is just looking a lot better in today's day. Ramiz Brahimaj had a rough start, but now he's just kind of on a pretty good tear. Finished Mickey Gall in the first round, finishes Billy Goff in the first round, finishing Austin Vanderford in the second round after, clearly losing that first round with control. I'm just going to go with Garimbo here to kind of do his thing against Wells. I think that he can impose his game plan of control. I think Wells, with his jiu-jitsu, will accept position quite a bit, lay on his back, but I think Garimbo will stay safe. Like I said, that submission loss to Luque, not because he got caught in a sub, but he really just kind of got dropped and was basically out, and Luque jumped in on the club and sub. So give me Temba Garimbo to get this one done in his, casual style of decisions, and let's move on to the co-main event. All right, the co-main event is Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Ante Delija, and, on a card that I said is pretty poverty, I think this is one of the better fights. I'm actually looking forward to this fight. This one and the Dulgarian one are the two fights that I kind of really want to watch on this card. And this Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Ante Delija fight, I think it makes a ton of sense. Cortes-Acosta coming off that loss to Sergey Pavlovich, but he is really kind of putting it all together as a top level UFC heavyweight in 2025. Ante Delija coming off his UFC debut to Marcin Tybura, where he just looked like a destroyer, goes in there, has an Aspinall-esque performance against Marcin Tybura, and I say that obviously because Delija famously Aspinall's one of Aspinall's close training partners. I'm going to go with Cortes-Acosta here, though. I think that if Delija doesn't get Acosta to the ground consistently, I think that he will find problems. Now, Cortes-Acosta has a really solid jab. Ante Delija looked insanely good against a slow, plotty Marcin Tybura who, somehow finds a way to win, but is really a pretty ass heavyweight if you look at it. Waldo Cortes-Acosta on the other side has a solid jab for the division. Like I said, pretty good boxer. His takedown defense is interesting, and if Delija does get him to the ground consistently, it could get interesting. But I think that Cortes-Acosta is coming in with some high-level experience coming off that Sergey Pavlovich loss. He's staying very active, which I like as well. Fought 2 months ago. Prior to that, fought 4 months ago, then 7 months ago. So this is going to be his fourth fight in a 12-month span. I like that for Cortes-Acosta. I think he's really getting better every fight, putting it together. So I'm going to take Cortes-Acosta, the more UFC experience. We see what he looked like against real UFC competition like Sergey Pavlovich. I think that Marcin Tybura is someone you can potentially look really, really good against if you have, certain skill set. And I think Delia's speed looked great against Tybura. I'm not sure it's going to look the same against Cortes-Acosta. So give me the dog here, Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Let's move on to the main event. Moving on to the main event, we got Steve Garcia versus David Onama. And this is a pretty close fight, and it's actually a pretty fun fight as well. I'm going to go with Steve Garcia to beat David Onama, though I think that this can be close in the sense that David Onama is going to be the quicker striker. He's going to be the more technical striker as well, but Garcia will impose his will more. He will be the one moving forward. He's going to force Onama to strike off the back foot, which I don't think Onama is as good as, when it comes to him moving forward himself. So I like Garcia in that aspect of this fight. With the grappling, we saw Onama go to the grappling in his last fight against Giga Chikadze because Chikadze was able to kind of, do his thing from the outside outside on the feet, but Onama used, his grappling to kind of exploit Chikadze on the ground. I don't see that path being there for Onama against Steve Garcia here. I think Garcia has some solid takedown defense, and I think that Garcia might actually look to shoot some offensive takedowns, especially if he's moving forward a lot in this matchup. That will be there for him. So I think that Garcia can mix in the wrestling. There is a world where Onama just kind of does slightly more than Garcia. Garcia's struggling to kind of get inside just because, Onama is a little bit quicker. I don't see the speed advantage playing that much of a role. I think over 3 rounds, Garcia should be able to do his thing. But I do see that world kind of being a possibility, so I can understand why the odds here are close, but I'm going to lean Garcia. I think that over 15 minutes, he does impose his will. I think he can kind of go to that offensive takedown route if needed. And, if not, I think he can have a classic Garcia performance where he just kind of moves forward, uses big power to get Onama out of there. So give me Steve Garcia to win this one, and that does it for all the picks and predictions for UFC Vegas 110. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you did like the breakdowns, like the video, subscribe, drop a comment, tell me who you're tailing, who you're fading when it comes to my predictions. We had, a little bit of a rough week again last week, so now we're going back-to-back weeks that were rough. Not going to lie, between Vancouver and UFC 321. We did much better on the main card, but, had a little bit of problems on the prelims. There were some decisions I thought that didn't go our way. Delgado being, specifically the one that I thought could have gone to Jose Delgado, should have gone to Jose Delgado, but he ends up not getting it. The fight was too close for me to say robbery, but I do think that he should have won that one. And then on top of that, the Rebecki one could have been a draw in my opinion. There was a judge that gave Ludovic Klein a 10-8 in the second round, which I just really disagree with. So I think that if that was a 10-9, that could have been a draw as well. But overall, let's get back on track. We were really hot with our predictions going into UFC Vancouver. It's been a little bit rough since then for the last 2 weeks. So I'm trying to get back on track. These Apex cards could, either be those cards or it could be pretty volatile at the same time. So let's see what happens. But we got a couple Apex cards to get back on track before the next pay-per-view. Let's do that. If you did like it, like I said, once again, like the video, and I will see you guys next weekend.